My name is General Sir Michael Rose. At the time of the Malvinas War, I was commanding the advanced force operations on those islands, and my units were there some 3 weeks before the main landings in San Carlos Water on the 21st of May. It was put to me by Captain Melbourne Hussey when he said, "This, Michael, was a war fought without hate, and it's a unique in the history of warfare." And that is absolutely true. I think the British soldiers had a great deal of sympathy for the young Argentine conscripts who were ill-prepared in many ways, badly supported, and still had to fight and do their duty for their country. What happened is that I had worked out that we were going to get to a situation where we might have to fight in Port Stanley, where there were some 2,000 civilians living, and that would cause a terrible humanitarian disaster, a bloodbath, and that I thought neither side, neither the Argentine side nor the British side, would want to be responsible for so many civilian deaths. So I established a line, using the medical line, through to the Argentine headquarters, and one day Captain Melbourne Hussey, with whom I had corresponded at the start of these discussions, called me and said, "I think we've got to a point where we need to talk." So I flew down by helicopter under a flag of truce. He met me and took me to General Menendez, and after a fairly protracted negotiations, which went on nearly 6 hours, for example, General Menendez initially only wanted to surrender the East Falkland Islands and Port Stanley. He didn't want to surrender the rest, and I said, well, this doesn't make sense, because the British now control the air and sea environment. We're dominant on the land, and really it's all or nothing in terms of surrender, and that took some way of getting through. Then we had to go through quite a lot of the Geneva Protocols and how the administration would be transferred from the Argentine administration to the British. There were a lot of fairly complicated details, which of course I was having to ad lib on and work out myself, and of course he was referring back to his own lawyers and even back to Buenos Aires as to what his next move should be. So it was fairly protracted. And at the end, the only change that occurred is that we insisted, and I agreed with General Menendez that this should be in there, that it was to be a surrender with honour, because the Argentine soldiers had fought extremely bravely, and the Air Force in particular had fought very bravely. We were astonished on the British side the high levels of losses that the Argentine Air Force were incurring, and yet they were still coming day after day and attacking the ships. And so, of course, it was going to be an end of an war, with both sides holding their heads high as they could in those circumstances. Yes, I did have a number of conversations with Margaret Thatcher after the war, and the prevailing facts that emerged from these conversations is that she was very ill-informed by the Royal Navy about what was actually going on the ground in the Falkland Islands. The British government had taken the view, quite rightly, that the war should be run predominantly by the Navy because it was a maritime environment. But of course the Navy didn't necessarily understand the dynamics of land battle and weren't passing the correct information or intelligence back to the War Cabinet. But when I started to explain this with Margaret Thatcher, she said I had no idea that you were on Mount Kent, and if I had, I would have never put pressure on the Navy to go and find some easy target, which of course it was not an easy target in the end, a large number of casualties on both sides, but it was not a necessary diversion from the main direction of march, which of course was Port Stanley. Well, my thoughts obviously are of all the people who died unnecessarily in that war, and the enormous courage shown by the combatants on both sides. And I would give an example of the Argentine Air Force pilots who were taking extraordinary casualties, and we even commented on at the time. They kept coming, even though sometimes half of their number were being shot down on a particular air raid. And I'm absolutely certain there will be a reconciliation in the near future. After 35 years, if the veterans are talking together increasingly now, and there are plans to increase the number of contacts that are being made, including possibly having a combined service of reconciliation in the cathedral in Port Stanley, that I think it's been possible for governments not to follow that route, which is the right way forward. I mean, we should never forget this war, because of course it was an unnecessary war. We should try and prevent these kind of wars happening in the future, that there should be reconciliation not only amongst the veterans, which is happening, but also amongst the two countries involved.